All right, so now that we're officially recording, yeah, let's maybe start with the article. As I said, I explained briefly why I thought it would be a good piece to start with. Does anyone wants to start maybe with giving their opinions about the piece or ideas they had about it, or don't be shy.
Or if we think it was related to something you were working on.
It might be useful, guys, if you introduce it in terms of things you kind of learn from it, in terms of the things which were interesting for you, kind of give an example of how you want the discussion to go. So maybe
okay.
one of them.
Then maybe I start with a couple of ideas, what I thought of it and where I thought it kind of opened up interesting things, and people can be, feel free to react to it. So for me, it's, I think a couple of themes came out that kind of I got from reading it. Sort of the broader was this whole, what she called engaging with our IR while rejecting its orthodoxies. And sort of the first core theme, I think two things I identified, which I found interesting, again, which I would like to give to the group to see what you think about it. The first was really this, what she considered an orthodox conception of sovereignty that many scholars of migration have sought to challenge. That returned a couple of times throughout the article. So that it emphasizes the importance of migration scholarship critically challenging. Again, she always uses this term orthodox conceptions. I think on page 299, she calls it orthodox conceptions of sovereignty and sovereign power, which I found interesting there. So first it was like, what is this orthodoxy that's around sovereignty, I assume, and at one point it's clearly that she emphasizes it's the territorial element of it. But she uses here two terms, sovereignty and sovereign power. So what kind of differences can we maybe draw from it? But very much she kind of draws that out. It was interesting to read because I actually thought a lot of the stuff she refers to, the autonomy of migration literature and so on, is kind of not directly completely new, I thought, in the migration literature. But she writes for a journal called International Relations. So clearly she's addressing potentially an IR audience to whom this is potentially new. What I kind of maybe wanted to get there a little bit is this this notion of orthodox conception of sovereignty, and what can we kind of get from it, because she's clearly sort of referring to that element that this is what migration scholarship contributes towards this debate of challenging this underpinning thing on IR, rejecting its orthodoxies. But are there potentially should we completely reject it, or are there potentially new ways of reimagining it as well? I think the way I kind of arrived at that, or what I wondered, I haven't fully thought it out yet, but I was reading a book chapter lately on it's a book called Sovereign Lives, Power and Global Politics. And there was a chapter by a woman called Karina Shaw on indigenous sovereignty, sort of pan-Aboriginal nationalism in Canada and so on. And this idea of renegotiating of sovereignty discourses itself. So is that even possible? Is the concept of sovereignty, with regards to migration, is it by definition always necessarily creating an inside and outside and other? Or can there be a constitution of sovereignty that is grounded in some sort of non-essentialized identity as well? So she kind of deals with Aboriginal nationalism in Canada, and there's really, really interesting elements of where she describes how it's more about this kind of concerns for viability of communities rather than abstract formalistic guarantees of separate autonomous units that we usually associate with sovereignty itself. And I found that really, really interesting. So she's kind of using it as well, how these kind of Aboriginal nationalisms have been used to actually challenge, colonial governments or like settler governments in Canada and the US in order to resist governmental attempts of assimilation. So talk very long now, maybe to kind of boil it down to a very short thing. Should we kind of, what her position seems to be, continue challenging this idea of sovereignty as such, as a concept per se, or are there potential ways of reimagining it? And yeah, so I wasn't fully sure. That's why I kind of want to put it out there for people. Like, is this example of Aboriginal nationalism really applicable to our field of migration studies? We talk of very different contexts. So yeah, this is just some ideas where I saw that. So for me, really, this kind of theme of sovereignty came out. Territorial sovereignty is what we should challenge with regards to IR as well. And yeah, is there maybe other ways of imagining it? Is kind of what I would like to put out there. Anyone maybe wants to jump on that?
I think it's interesting what you're saying in terms of sovereignty and in terms of the concept of sovereignty, but it really draws a very specific view of it. I think if you share the paper and see how it's defined, you can see that what it does, it talks about sovereignty as something which the state has. It's kind of like a sense of power, is it right? Something which defines what is sovereign, who kind of makes decision. And I mentioned it in the chat, saying that it relates to this idea of kind of Hegel sort of philosophy, where effectively it's sort of about this view of sovereign, someone who decides on the exceptions. So who is exceptional, who can be treated differently, and the rest. Is it right? So the very specific view of sovereignty. But I think that's what the author of this paper is talking about, this sense of sovereignty, which then kind of is linked to power. So someone who has the power to define who belongs, who doesn't belong, in terms of migrants, deciding, these are illegal migrants, they don't belong here, or these are legal migrants, they can stay, and so on. So there's very specific view of sovereignty. But I have a very kind of concern about this view of sovereignty, because it really suggests that power only works in certain ways. And to me, that there is, it suggests that people can be empowered, or the state can be empowered to have that particular view of sovereignty. But there is also kind of an alternative view of it, which really talks about sovereignty as something which no one can seize, no one can possess. It's not an object, it's not a thing. So it's always kind of elusive. So that sense of sovereignty is not something which is granted and therefore cannot be used in application to state borders or legal requirements and so on. But in fact, that sovereignty is the sense of kind of withdrawal, sense of something which is related to kind of withdrawal from the rest, being kind of exposed, being humble. So that sort of sovereignty, with a very different view, not something which is about, I am bigger than you, I can dictate the rules, but it's about that sense of withdrawal and realizing this is my sovereignty, I'm kind of open to the things. And it really presents it probably challenges the orthodox views of sovereignty altogether as it's presented in the paper. But I wonder what the other people think about this in terms of their views. How do you kind of see it in your relation? Because we often have this assumption about sovereignty as something which dictates the way, for example, we establish relationships with people who are foreign, who are different. And I wonder whether this can change the balance differently in terms of establishing this kind of relation, or possibility of establishing this relation.
One of the things that really struck me was about, the term human and the idea of kind of the more than human element of everything. And it feels to me as if what it's saying is that, now is a time when it's more than humans who are actually forcing people to properly move across the world. And that, it's the planet that's talking, it's the planet that's, the whole climate change thing is a stronger force that's making people want to move. And I think, to me, in this article, there's a big kind of undertone about certainly about colonial views on the world and a kind of us and them mentality about which countries are the recipients of immigration and from which countries other people move. And yeah, it does question the Anthropocene and the way of seeing the world as just being about how humans relate to each other. And certainly there are some significant non-human actors. And I think what the article is saying is it's saying that generally the way that people have seen population movement is more about kind of economics rather than other reasons, and that we struggle to actually get beyond the kind of othering of kind of less developed countries, and we can't quite see why there are other reasons why people might want to move. But so the non-human thing to me is something to think really quite deeply about.
Oh, sorry, we had the microphone off. Thank you very much. I thought that was a really cool contribution because I found that interesting as well, the non-human element. I don't know if someone wants to jump in there. I don't want to talk too much, but I found that interesting because I've been aware of how important this kind of new materialism has become lately in the literature and so on, but I know it more from exactly how I said, sort of discussions of climate change, the Anthropocene, all of that. And it hasn't kind of appeared on my radar in terms of migration studies. So I found that interesting how she integrated that in terms of, how obviously climate change will affect migration patterns and how this maybe helps us to think beyond this kind of, sort of orthodox categories again of, what Sergei talked about of self and other as well. So maybe to use that human and more than human element to kind of really challenge our own things of self and other as well. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Does anyone else has anything about the article, anything that you found interesting or that you thought maybe that you want to share with the group? Just choose some. Felix?
Yeah, it's not directly related to the non-human approach. It's more about sovereignty and what it was described as a double victimization, like about the humanitarianism approach and how humanitarianism can reproduce some control or domination processes. And I find it really interesting, and I find it a bit related with the sovereignty approach. That is like this idea of like that people who are who can like the people who are controlled in their migrations, like the marginalized one, are oftentimes like victims of more than one processes. And it could be 2, 3, or much more about like administration's routes, or like it can have like many different forms. And I find it interesting in the article that this for studying these processes of victimization, the approach of I don't remember the name of the researcher, but it was about like considering the people, marginalized migrant people, as autonomous and creative subjects. And for like in a methodological aspect, I find it really interesting to conserve this idea for like implementing field work studies and this can also allows reducing the risk of victimization from the researcher to the other people, and also to understand, it also can allow us to reveal other form of victimization that people can experience in their migrant lives, even some victimization aspects that are less known or less visible. And that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I thought that was really interesting as well, this kind of autonomy of migration element that was there. So to go beyond the, like, to move away, which has been, I think, around since a couple of years now in the literature, but still is like almost becoming a bit of a dominant theoretical thing now, to say, like, to get away from the state-centric element, to say, like, you know, how are migrants actually shaping that? The state is always almost a step behind. There's an autonomy in what migrants are doing, and there's a to kind of go away from I get how you call it, a methodological victimization sort of thing. So absolutely. Do people have anything to say about that? Maybe this idea of, you know, autonomy of, like, that came out of the article a little bit, or something else. It doesn't have to be that, but I found that a really interesting element as well.
There's a bit where she says that I liked the way she expressed that migration itself is a creative political force that in itself that people seek to capture, so that migration in itself is this political force. And she also describes it as a field of struggle, which I quite like. But then I was a bit puzzled that it says it's a field of struggle rather than as a site of freedom and or control. And then I was wondering what the struggle is for, if it's not for freedom and control. There was just it's on page 294 if anybody wants to look. So I was interested in the way she was looking at as sort of migration first as the force that other things might want to gain control of. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to everybody.
No, completely. No, that's really good. That's the point of the reading group. I am very excited that that we have for the first time trying to challenge, or that we also trying to challenge it a bit. We'll see what comes out of it.
I just was puzzled about the struggle, but not for freedom or control. So I was wondering what the struggle was, the field of struggle was struggling for.
Anyone want? I have an idea about it, but I would like to don't want to talk too much. So does anyone want to maybe jump on that? Anyone has an idea or something to? I think Sergey, your microphone is.
Oh, no, I was just mumbling. Sorry.
Okay.
I was just saying, philosophically, the freedom is a very complex thing, and again, it depends how you approach it. If it is something which you consider as a freedom from or freedom for, there's a very different kind of sense of it. So I think we unwillingly dealing with the very complex concepts from the very beginning. it's quite challenging, but yeah, I would love to hear what the others think.
Yeah, I thought maybe just an idea I had there, Sarah, for what you just mentioned, as this kind of that she identifies it as a field of struggle. I think, but I could be wrong. Again, this is why I would like a little bit of feedback from people, what you think about it. I think my perception was that she wanted to avoid, so conceptually, this idea of autonomy of migration, the idea is that it makes us go away from a state-centric view, but also of kind of framing migrants as just victims, as these passive things that are kind of subjected to state control, that are just basically bounced around by border policies and asylum policies of nation states. So to call it a field of struggle is maybe to kind of avoid the opposite of that, to kind of glorify migrants as the, you know, let's use a Marxism, the new proletariat that will overthrow all kind, you know, this kind of to somehow take migrants as this kind of, you know, that necessarily any kind of migration, any migrant is someone who's out there to like tear down the, you know, the system of nation states, of the, you know, the idea of sovereignty, of the sovereign territorial nation state, that it's not that, you know, there's a variety of things that come into people's motivations, and that so kind of I think that was my perspective. To call it the field of struggle is to say not every action of migrants, not every form of migration is necessarily challenging you know, territorial ideals of statehood or sovereignty or things like this. So, you know, often situations are so precarious for migrants that, you know, the goal is to get, you know, a settled status or a passport or something like this. So, you know, like people use the system in certain ways to get advantages, or, you know, in order to get a status like this, or, you know, adopt a certain national identity. You know, there's a variety of things I could think of there now, but it's this, I think that was my perspective of it, to say, okay, there is maybe a certain ambivalence to this politics. It's not like we shouldn't turn these old ideals just on its head and say, you know, every form of migration is necessarily, you know, like a kind of political, or like a form of, you know, revolutionary action kind of thing. But I could be wrong. That was my perspective of it.
I think, yeah, like Sergey said, there's a lot going on in here, and a lot of it's very complex. And I think the sovereignty thing. So, you know, this isn't my field, but I certainly thought that the stuff on page 296 about the kind of the Amazonian ontology, if you like, maybe what I felt from that was that she's trying to say that there are maybe people who live in this world who respect they respect the non-human more than we do, in a way. And that actually the planet, we should maybe be more aligned to the way. This is like quite a hard thing to get across, that maybe the kind of the Occidental view of the world, this colonial view of the world, is that we actually control the planet, and that we've generally got away with it for a long time. We've got away with kind of taking resources from the earth. We've got away with polluting, blah blah blah. We've got away with transporting everything, people, resources, whatever, across the globe. But we maybe don't respect the way that we don't respect the world as much as maybe other people do. And so this Amazonian, there's only a snippet of an idea in it. It's starts on page 296, but I thought that was quite interesting, and maybe we don't sort of understand, like you were saying, Franz, that generally people see migration as some kind of struggle, some kind of fight for political reasons or economic reasons, but there is maybe another narrative of the non-human, you know, that the non-human in our lives is trying to tell us something. Anyway, that's like a small thing. I'm not sure if I'm on the right track here, but it gave me some inspiration, that page or two.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That was a really great thing. Something, I didn't sort of come across like this, but thank you. Yeah, thanks for the insight. Yeah, who else wants to join? Steph?
Yeah, I don't know. Reflecting on what Aled was saying, I don't know if, I mean, I know it touches a little bit upon, you know, non-human and things, but I think what I got from the reading as well is the question about, I mean, she doesn't really talk about this, and I wonder, but reading the article, I just thought it made me wonder what makes us human. And I think this is what she is trying to say, you know, and exploring the relationship between being human and sovereign power. Then she is really asking who is considered human and by whom. So I think in the kind of power relations which are happening into, you know, who is a citizen, who is a non-citizen, there is this kind of issue, which is who is human and what makes us human. And I think that was, yeah, she didn't explore it very, very much, but I think that was very interesting.
Yeah, great, thank you. Does anyone else have any sort of on that theme or something else? Let's see. Maybe, I think something I kind of sort of additionally, I think it relates a little bit. We have talked about this sovereignty thing before, but I thought that maybe again, it's related there, sort of how, I was wondering how she sees the kind of political element there, because she makes a lot. So a lot what kind of, I thought, repeats in the article is that it's not just a question of research and academia, but also politics of language, of how we talk, how we formulate things, and how it kind of translates into disrupting things. So I think it's on page 298, that it's kind of, you know, when she talks about indigenous scholarships, and that's why I mentioned this chapter earlier about kind of, you know, Aboriginal nationalism and things. So she kind of makes this example: how can we challenge, how can we disrupt our ways of thinking, or Western-centric ways of thinking? And when she draws on indigenous scholarships, that she kind of talks about terms that would destabilize dominant frameworks of knowledge. And then importantly, I thought she says, along with the exclusionary politics through which they are constructed. So that's, for her, it's not just an academic exercise purely. And I think she makes the point, I forgot, I should have really written it down the page somewhere, where she's like, yeah, I'm really sorry, I kind of didn't write it down now, but I think it's along the lines of migration scholarship forces us to engage with the politics of inequality, if we want it or not. And the choice is then if we're going to listen and what we do with that, which I found quite powerful. And how, so her point, obviously, of the article is to kind of address IR and other forms of scholarship or other fields of that. But it's like, her point is like, what do we do with our research? How can we influence others? And I thought that was quite a powerful thing, because I thought she was there quite right. Like, yeah, the very fact of engaging with migration kind of forces these questions onto you. It's very hard, I think, in migration scholarship to ignore these dynamics that we kind of started exploring here, these colonial dynamics, these dynamics of inequality, to which makes, I guess, the stuff we do interesting. And to a certain extent, I think that's what she says, like, within, you know, within limits, and it's obviously has its own fraud. This is always a fraud process, but it's yeah, now I found it. It's on page 301. That's where it actually starts. So migration scholarship, to put it another way, is a field of research that demands a confrontation with privilege, whether we like it or not. Yeah. Thanks, Jamie. So yeah, it's that's something I found quite. Does anyone thought that was an interesting element, and what do they thought about that, about the kind of politics of doing migration research? Is maybe something interesting to explore as well.
I wanted to ask a question to the group and see, I think there were people who were doing with precarity, didn't they? There were colleagues who were working with precarity, and I thought it would appeal to them. I wonder what they think about precarity. What is their view with, irrespective of this paper? There was someone who did an introduction in the beginning, I just couldn't remember.
Yeah, I think it was me that mentioned precarity. I've come at precarity more of from a broader perspective, and been trying to link quite disparate areas of reading. So I've been reading around vulnerability, resilience, disasters in general and stuff like that. So not really relating to migration, but a common theme has been the precarity. And it was interesting to read about it from a migration point of view, of how the humanitarian aspect and just forms of control of the state lead migrants to be precarious. So I found that an interesting addition to the other readings I've been doing.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I thought this idea, there's another theme that's definitely coming out, or I think it was a little bit more in the background, but this idea of, humanitarianism and this kind of concept of the humanitarian border and the ambivalence of the politics of humanitarianism.
I think.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that links back to the privilege challenge of the previous comment, that not just migration, but every scholarship area really does need to face up to the privilege of being able to research, and the privilege researchers hold versus those they're studying. So it's good to see another area dealing with similar challenges. across.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I thought I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but Miriam, you said at the beginning that your research is on Syrian refugees, men, and so on. And I thought, I don't know, lately I've been reading about that a little bit, and I came across really interesting stuff on kind of how migrants are governed by categorizing them as well. So in Europe in 2015, that you had different categories of refugees, and Syrian refugees were always treated as this kind of, you know, real refugees, and how there is a politics of kind of governing migrants through that. Did you come across something like this in your work? Because I thought it's interesting for this humanitarianism element she talks about, this idea of, you know, like sometimes it's not just exclusionary border politics, but also the state helping and reinforcing its own border controls like this.
Yes, I mean, not necessarily on like certain ethnic groups of migrants, but on, I mean, my focus is on gender, and I'm focusing on men in forced migration. So obviously, this idea of how humanitarian just categorize different groups and how, I mean, it's very broad question. I don't know how to not mobilize too much time, but I mean, basically we have to go down to like just the concept of vulnerability and why do we use it to categorize like female bodies that needs to move, and now that we decided that not all female bodies are vulnerable, but some are, maybe it's the same for men. And if you want to integrate men in dealing with migration, asylum seekers or anything, like they have to be vulnerable people too. So like it all comes down to the question of like why vulnerability is the only way we can accept like to let people come in or sovereign territories. And I mean, for me, like the main problem with that article was it touched on, I think, like if we want to go to the roots, it's all like dynamics of power and domination, and she talks about state, and she talks about different concepts, but she really just slightly touch on it and doesn't really go deep to ask, like, I feel the big question when she talked about like white supremacist academia, and not, she doesn't say white supremacist, but like what white people in academia, and she doesn't like say maybe we should not like be doing this kind of work, maybe we should be doing something else so there is more space for other people. Like Sergei, you were talking about like sovereignty has like how you obliviate, I'm sorry, English is bad, but how the passivity and how you just like, anyway, just leave the place for somebody else. Like, and I think that's a big question that should be addressed in that paper, but it's kind of a, not a fraud, but I mean, I feel like it's kind of critical, but not really critical, like as just saying the real issue and just naming the real issue, which is maybe there is no way of doing an ethical work, doing the job that we're trying to do, and maybe we should do something else. I'm in the same boat as everybody, but that's the big question I'm juggling with. So sorry, very broad, but that's what I was getting at with that paper.
Oh, great, thank you very much. I thought this was a great kind of jump in on this idea of vulnerability that I thought came out of there as well. Just very quickly, maybe before I give it to someone else, I wonder if it's because the paper seems to be addressing, basically, at least that's a little bit my sense I got, a kind of scholars who usually are maybe less critical about challenging these kind of underpinning orthodoxies. So yeah, the journal is international relations, and kind of I found at the beginning her point is a little bit to say, look, this is, so I had a sense of, well, I sometimes thought she doesn't explore necessarily anything new or anything kind of theoretically in depth. So my sense was this is kind of an article addressing a new audience. So maybe it's about, that's what it's kind of why that is. But I had a similar feeling there as well. Yeah. I thought Jamie wrote something really interesting in the chat about this kind of categorization. Is that something you got from the article as well, or?
Sorry, I'm on two screens, so struggling to get my cursor over. Yeah, just what you mentioned then, Franz, before you ask the question to Miriam about the categories of refugees. I just thought, yeah, basically lots of different factors influencing it, which could be the sovereign, the nation, the state. But within the paper, they're talking about anti-racism and decolonizing narratives as well. And basically not to kind of overlook, as they mentioned, that global color line as well, of like how they treat certain people who are fleeing persecution as well. And just like even in recent examples, like non-migration, but with like COVID policies for quarantine in the UK, you know, like some may say that they unfairly target countries who are from the global south, whereas if you're in the global north, you may not face the hefty quarantine hotel charge and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I just thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I thought this was sort of came out there as well. Yeah, I didn't thought of it of this term. That's why I found it really cool that you put it in the chat. This idea of global color line and decolonizing. This idea of, yeah, it relates for me a little bit to this humanitarian element. Anyone else wants to? I think, Keith, you wrote something interesting. I'm not fully sure I fully got that. So do you mind kind of explaining that to the group? Too much migration is seen as closed by relocation. I'm quite interested in what you mean by that.
It's just how people understand migration, as if it's a clearly sort of like you're buying something in a shop and you're going to sort of, you want a better community. So you move to a different place. And that's, you know, that's it. That's the end of the story. But of course, it's not really. It's when you get there, you have to adjust, you have to change, and the whole sort of your whole life is often sort of mapped out in very different ways than you're anticipating. So in other words, there's sort of so much attention is given to just to sort of the movement between X and Y that the whole sort of time series, the whole process historically, as it develops into the future, is not sort of looked at enough. So we basically leave the game too soon. It's something I've written about elsewhere, but it's just that, you know, so much ultimately that is important in the migration maybe nothing to do with why you came in the first place. You know, why you stay somewhere or why you move on somewhere else. It's also entangled in the whole of the life course. That just to separate it out as if it's going in a shop to buy some cereal for your breakfast, it's not the same sort of act as that. It's not just it's the commodification of it, I suppose, is coming into play there, and how it's just another sort of market process, whereas arguably it's much more significant from a sort of life course perspective.
That's really interesting. Cool. Thanks. Do you think, because the whole kind of point of the article is like addressing IR, and I keep coming back to that, but I thought that was a sense. How do you think that would like play out? What you just said, sort of with regards to addressing, you know, international relations that kind of deals with interconnections between states, sort of thing. What can they learn from our research, maybe?
I guess I got to tell you now that I don't even know what article you're discussing. So as far as I know, I've never got the. I don't know what the reference is. So I'm afraid I can't comment on that.
Okay, I'm really sorry. Did you not? Okay.
I don't think I got it. No.
Okay, I need to check that out. Okay, so I thought it was attached to the email, but I make sure to send it.
Not to the reminder. It's not. No, not mine.
No, we didn't put it on the reminder. We put it on the first. Yeah. Okay.
I don't think I got that. Yeah, unless I've deleted it by accident, which is possible.
Okay. Lesson learned for the future. We're going to put the article again on the reminders. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes. Anyone else have any ideas or anything that came from the article still, or Mila? Do you have some?
No, I think we pretty much talk about all I have put it like yeah, what I was thought.
What was your interest, Mila? I was just curious. It was France.
It was also what you said at the beginning about the link with territoriality. I think we didn't talk about that. The thing that the point of view is like really state-centered, and that we could like maybe explore like the another kind of like territoriality, which like can be macro or things like that. So yeah, I don't know if it was what you were saying at the beginning when you were talking about. But Yeah.
For me, yeah, I thought that was, maybe that's as a last thing. I would be quite interested what people think of that. Is I think what came as a second thing for me out a little bit, sort of in addition to what I mentioned earlier, this kind of where she discusses orthodox conceptions of sovereignty. Then the second big thing is this idea of challenging the state. Or it seems to me that she kind of equalizes orthodox with territorial, which equalizes kind of racialized elements. And this idea that for her, it's like about rejecting conventional, which I'm totally behind, conventional assumptions about discrete states and contained societies. So kind of, it seems like what her problem is this idea of the inside and the outside, this idea of a, you know, like that you can somehow conceptualize a closed community. But I kind of wondered, for me, it didn't came clearly out. There was somewhere where she basically says about like, she's critical that like, and I get it from a conceptual point where she's like, that, what was it? I think it's on page 293. It's about that in research, there's still a continuation of the privilege of the role of the state. So even research that is critical of state practices kind of runs risk of reinforcing the state, and international actors as the main ones who are kind of, you know, influential in how migration is happening. And it's weird, I get it from a conceptual point that we should really look at migrants, or like, you know, this idea of autonomy of migration, that, you know, get away from these kind of, you know, reinforcing the importance of the state. But it doesn't come out for me sort of clearly, because she, again, on page 294, then is kind of the risk of reinforcing the state as the primary actors. So while I get it conceptually, I'm not sure, again, it's just to play devil's advocate maybe. Does this anti-orthodox, anti-territorial implies a rejection of the state per se? Are we in migration all anarchists now, basically? Is, you know, like, does any kind of critical migration scholarship necessarily needs to reject the concept of the state?
Can I say something?
Yeah, Steph, maybe that would be.
I don't know if it's so much about rejecting the notion of the state as to shifting the focus. I think she's arguing that, you know, the state is there, it exists, but in changing the focus from state to subject, to person, to migrant, we can kind of shift, you know, research, the discourse, and therefore we can shift all those notions about, you know, privilege, precarity, exclusion. So I think, to me, it's not about rejecting, it's more about shifting focus.
Yeah.
Sorry, I completely cut you in your...
Yes, sorry, I don't know. Yeah, I know about the state point of view. I'm sorry, it's a long time I haven't heard English, so I hope I understood well. But it's about this state. I think the article is kind of a lot from a IR perspective in the studies, and that's why the state seems maybe a lot that's more a focus, but in anthropology, geography, sociology, and for what I know in Africa, there is a lot of studies from the migrants' point of view, and it's more like, it's not that the state is not an actor anymore, but there is like a lot of other actors who are across the borders, like transnational actors. So there is really another point of view, but it's not like the state is not here. It's just that it's not the main or the only actor, I think. I don't know if it's clear, but
no, absolutely. I think that yeah, you could be quite right on that. Yeah. Steph?
Yeah, sorry, I realized raising hands was actually a very good idea. I should have done this before. Just to and very quickly, because I am aware that, you know, it's past 5 o'clock, but yeah, I think Khadija, you said, you know, the migrants' point of view, and I think that's also something to think about, because even researchers who are researching migrants from a migrant's perspective, I mean, are we true to the migrant's point of view? We can also take a, you know, a stance from the, what does she say, state-centric point of view, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Felix?
Yes.
Yeah, just to add to this, about what did you say, Khadija? It's also about scales. I think that we can find sort of forms of sovereignty or states at different levels, at different scales, like also at the urban scales, or like at the neighborhood scales, if there are like some representatives of power or sovereignty. And about this idea of like people who are studying about migrant point of view, I agree that it can also replicate or continue to feed the sovereignty of states and this idea, but I think that with some methodological choices or a methodological approach, it's also possible to tackle these risks of the research, like a long-term field work, like knowing well the communities or the population before doing the studies. Like it's not because we are implementing some new methodologies that it's for sure will tackle this idea of feeding the state's mechanism, but it can be used as like for limiting the risks.
No, absolutely, thank you. Miriam?
Yes, but I think like with the idea of switching the focus, like maybe because the state is a really abstract concept, like we say the state, but we never say like clearly what we're talking about. Maybe if we switch the focus to like state resistance, like enacted by like action, like enacted by migrants and local population and everything, and if we really like name what state is about in different contexts, like when it's at the border, when it's in cities, when it's in like different places like that, like maybe we can see that it's not such a clear material power on the ground, and there is so many like trenches, I don't know how to say that, but like spaces like where states can't see you or cannot like really have a grip on you. And so I think that these resistances, like not just like, because just point of view of migrant, like I mean it's obviously it's really important, but like how does that really take form in really the act of resistance, I think, and by migrant and by like just going away from that category of migrant, just like by people acting like together just to confront that idea of the state. So I think that it's maybe a good way of going away from just statist theories. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm in full agreement on that. I think that absolutely. I thought there was something a little bit missing, perhaps, which kind of has arrived in the migration literature, but hasn't fully made it through in that article particular. This kind of, you know, active challenges to asylum policies and border policies. How is, migration constitutes a challenge, and how it is resisted and what kind of spaces maybe emerge from that. Aled?
Yeah, I just following up what Miriam said, I think I mean, I thought the article was kind of interesting, but I think it could have been a bit more direct about a few things. And I personally, I found the non-human bit the most interesting and the thing that made me think hardest about what is she trying to say. And I've just been reading again the conclusions again, and I think that's probably where it could go next. Is this the introduction to a special edition? Are there
I think so. Yeah. I think
so. Maybe there might be some other stuff in there.
There might be some articles. Yeah.
Yeah, there might be some other stuff in there which pushes these ideas a bit more, and that's why it's maybe
it could be
a bit more, forceful about certain ideas. But that's certainly the thing that I find really intriguing. And sovereignty is definitely, it's a social construct. It's a thing, and the nation is obviously a social construct, and sometimes nature gives us an obvious border to a country or a nation, but a lot of nations are lines drawn on maps, blah blah blah. But yeah, I just thought the non-human thing is intriguing, and I guess that maybe a different way to take it is that we've been getting away with the idea that we can have sovereign states for a long time, and maybe that's under threat now. Maybe the non-human is going to be more significant than we I think it could argue more forcefully the links to climate change. That's basically my thoughts on it, and that's why I found it interesting.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Sarah, you have something to add as well?
Yeah, I was just interested in sort of linking maybe a couple of things, like Keith was saying about migration not just being about the process of that we sort of maybe stop talking about it after the movement has happened. But I suppose my research is interested in groups of people who have got here and are settling or whatever, and that also people were mentioning ideas of scale, so about states, then cities, then in my case very small rural communities, and kind of a third thing linking out with within the article, there's a bit where she talks about humanitarianism and the relationship between care and control. And although what I'm looking at is far away from the sort of front line of humanitarianism, on the other hand, there is a sort of element of that even in these very small interactions, and that on that scale, the sort of care but also control related to integration later on, after the sort of movement has happened, is that whole sort of thing maybe links together for me, of what happens on a small scale later, and that sort of critique of humanitarianism and the relation between care and control in quite sort of subtle ways to do with so-called integration. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's very interesting, thank you. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, it's specifically on the role as well, and sort of the follow-up on that. No, thanks very much for the contribution. All right, does anyone else have anything like they really want to get out? But otherwise, I know we've sort of been doing almost an hour now.
Let's go see.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I'm with people here, and I can't talk to you because they are working. I cannot get access to internet here. Then I'm really sorry. Then I'm Jola Kosigari. I'm a PhD student at Paris 1, and my PhD topic is related to international mobility and exchange in West Africa. I find the debate it's really interesting for me, and I think I don't want to come back about state migration and state, the link between migration and state in West Africa here, because it shifts. I don't know how to say it. It put emphasis on some states considered in past like weak states, and this in this time of migration, I don't know, international migration policies, these states are, I don't know, are gaining power because they are considered like a step of I don't know, humanitarian place. That's where they keep people when they help people, those who are, I don't know, those who are willing to travel toward, I don't know, desert of Libya, as Niger, and they keep people, they take these people back to Niger, and now Niger state is become like, I don't know, in West Africa, a place of EU, in European Union policies, I don't know how to say it in English, but like Niger becomes a very important state in international relation about migration topics. When we do in West Africa, we want to talk about migration topics, we are most of time, we must address the question about Niger. And Niger were in past a really weak people. We don't talk about if it's not about terrorism and other topic like this. But in migration, I don't know, migration, I don't know how to say it, but it's like, I'm really sorry, I don't have word, my English really is really bad. But I think I'm going to write it down and it will be better for you to understand.
Thank you. No, that was really, really interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I think if we get in the future for groups like this, case studies, so specifically you mentioned Nigel, on this idea of, you know, the European Union kind of moving border control into North Africa and so on, and even into the West Saharan countries. That's absolutely something incredibly interesting to explore potentially. So, no, thank you for contributing that. All right, I think we potentially can sort of leave it there for today. I thought there were some really interesting themes coming out. We can maybe explore in the future for the following reading groups. So I think definitely something that seemed to be interesting for people was this idea of scales. I think I heard quite this, but also vulnerability, and Miriam's stuff on resistances I thought was really interesting, and people seemed to nod a lot when we were discussing that. So maybe this is something potentially as a theme to explore for the future groups. So yeah, just to give you a heads up for the next, as I said, we're going to do this like monthly, but we're very open to get suggestions for readings and things like this. So please feel free to drop an email to either me or Mila or Steph. If you just reply to the email basically that we're sending around, we should get it. And then I think we said till end of the week we're going to decide sort of on a new reading, maybe it's related one of those themes that we can then kind of everyone can read, and we can discuss in roughly 4 weeks again. So I think the next reading group is going to be, again, we're going to send an email around, but it's going to be 14th of December. So we don't want to do it too close before Christmas, but kind of that we have one more, I think, in the old year would be good. And yeah, so if you have any suggestions for readings from what you thought might maybe dock on nicely onto what we discussed today, or that you personally find interesting, or that you thought would really fit the group in terms of, you know, migration research, yeah, feel free to email us that stuff.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, so
yeah, Franz.
Thank you for everyone. Yeah, sorry.
Can I just say, Franz, I wouldn't have it any later than that week, because that's, you know, just for Christmas. So
yeah, I know. It's a bit of December's always a bit of a tricky one of doing.
I thought you were going to say December 24th for next one or something.
No.
I not that keen.
Lives. So I think 14th of December we're going to try it. Is the time for you guys okay? Tuesday at 4 p.m. We just thought it might be an kind of. Is that something that fits with people and that they find good? Cool. I think then we potentially leave it there, and we're going to send in Felix.
Yeah, not just like if it's possible to do this session in the afternoon, it will be.
Yeah. I don't know what time it is.
I'm in Colombia, so for the hour change, it's better to do it in the afternoon for me if it's possible for everyone.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it is. Yeah. Is it okay at this time for you? I don't know what time is it in where you
Yeah,
are.
now it's like 12, but yeah,
Okay. Yeah, cool.
like between 3 p.m. in UK until the night, it's good for me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
That's good to.
but like if it's in the morning, it will be.
And you also, Khadija, I don't know, like it's sunny. And I don't know what time is it for you.
It doesn't look like Paris.
Yeah.
No, it's Ivory Coast, so it's like same as in the UK.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, so thank you everyone for coming up. I hope you found it interesting and kind of sort of stimulating. And yeah, that maybe that's, I mean, it was obviously today a little bit exploratory just to see, but I really had the feeling that sort of, you know, it really started in the second of getting well and people contributing. And so, yeah, that's the idea of it. I think that we just discussed something interesting. So if there's anything, as I said before, you're passionate about and you'd like to read, please send us the suggestions and we're happy to kind of integrate them.
Yeah, and if you have any question on the conference in May and things like that, like feel free, same to email us and
yeah,
we will discuss about it.
Yeah, maybe
so
maybe beginning of the next meeting we can say a couple of words about the conference. If you're interested in participating, it's going to be in Swansea and free for the postgrads and early career researchers. And so yeah, it's going to be a great, hopefully a great, nice event of, you know. But yeah, I think we're going to say a couple of words maybe the next meeting, just to that you guys know what it is about.
Yeah.
All right.
Felix.
And just to know if you were planning to do like to speak about like different topics related to migration, like if you have already ideas of what will be the other topics, like today was more about like international relations, and wanted to know if you have any ideas or plans of what will be the next topics, or if it's more like depending on what article you will receive, or if it's like more spontaneous ideas.
Yeah, I think it depends on what people are interested in and what will emerge from the discussions month by month. So we're keen on this being a kind of collaborative thing. So if, you know, if people want to send us article and suggestions, I think it would be great.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Yeah, we don't have like set the things. We wanted also to know who were participating and what are their interests, to find like reading that can interest, like that can be used in our own works. I would say like this is why if you have something you are reading at the moment and you wanted to discuss broadly with like other person, this is like basically the idea of this too. So yeah, so it's not set, but if but we
I think it's to give everyone a chance as well, because clearly we have sort of different interests. And so, you know, like you guys might give us a range of suggestions. We obviously can't do them all, but that is the idea, that with 6 sessions, hopefully we can kind of cover a range of different topics. So let's say, you know, I'm just making this up. Miriam is really interested in resistances and stuff in, you know, state-centric approaches, and each, you know, that we have different sessions to address these different things. But the idea is that we kind of take your guys' feedback on what you're interested in, and we try our best to kind of integrate it.
Okay.